Vivid verses.
The city of Erin looked best from the 14th floor, especially in October, when the light came in low and amber through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment and made everything below look like it was on fire in a good way. I'd chosen the building specifically for that view. Most people thought it was about status, about having the right address. It wasn't. It was about starting every morning with something that reminded me the world was larger than whatever problem was sitting on my desk. I had a good life. Not a perfect one. I'd stopped believing in perfect around the time I turned 28, but a genuinely good one, built carefully and without shortcuts. My name is Corbin Ashworth. I'm 34. I run a mid-sized brand strategy consultancy called Paracep that I co-founded 6 years ago with my business partner, Leo Ferris, out of a 2-desk office above a dry cleaner on Coldwell Street. We now occupy the 7th floor of the Harlan Building downtown and employ 23 people. I say this not to boast, but to give you a sense of the kind of discipline it takes to build something like that. You don't grow a consultancy from 2 people to 23 without learning how to read rooms, manage egos, spot inconsistency, and stay calm when things are collapsing around you. These are not natural gifts. They're learned skills, painful ones. I ran every morning 6 kilometers, same route through Kastner Park, regardless of weather. I cooked on Sundays, enough for most of the week. I kept my apartment clean and my calendar organized and my finances in order. I'm not describing a robot. I had close friends, genuine ones. I laughed easily. I enjoyed a slow evening with a good bottle of wine as much as the next person. But I was disciplined in the way that people are when they've lived through a period of genuine disorder and decided, consciously, never to return to it. The period of disorder was my late 20s. A failed venture before Paracep, a relationship that consumed too much of me, a season where I made decisions based on feeling rather than thought. I don't regret that time. I learned more from it than from anything that went right. But I filed it away and moved on. I met Nadia Voss at a dinner party hosted by my friend Theo Calder and his wife, Bex, at their house in the Norwell district. It was a Thursday evening in early March. 8 people around a long wooden table, candles, and too much Merlot, and a conversation that kept sprawling into unexpected territory the way good dinner table conversations do. Nadia was seated across from me, 2 seats down, and she had this quality of paying attention that I noticed immediately. Not the performative kind, not nodding and smiling on cue, but the real kind, where her eyes moved when something genuinely interested her and stayed still when it didn't. She was a photographer, commercial work primarily, product campaigns, brand editorials, but her personal work was architectural. Empty interiors, abandoned spaces, the geometry of rooms no longer occupied. I saw her portfolio later, and it was striking. She had an eye for the relationship between light and absence. We talked after dinner. Just the 2 of us on Theo's back porch while the others were inside. She was sharp and funny, and she challenged things I said in a way that felt like genuine engagement rather than performance. I walked home that night thinking about the conversation more than I usually think about conversations. We exchanged numbers through Theo and started texting that weekend. By the following week, we were having coffee. By the end of March, we were spending Friday nights together. It moved at a pace that felt natural, not rushed. And for the first 4 months, it was genuinely good. We had real compatibility, similar tastes, similar rhythms. She liked quiet mornings, and so did I. She didn't need constant entertainment, and neither did I. We could sit in the same room reading different things and feel comfortable. That matters more than people acknowledge when they're listing what they want in a partner. But somewhere around month 5, things started shifting. Not dramatically at first. Subtle changes in tone. A sharpness in her responses that hadn't been there before. I noticed it with the particular attention I paid to patterns. I can't help it, it's how my mind works, but I told myself it was stress. She had a difficult client that summer, a campaign that kept getting revised, a creative brief that moved the goalposts every other week. I gave it space. The first incident I can point to was in July. We were supposed to meet for dinner at Callaway's, a small Italian place near my office that we'd been to a half dozen times. I arrived on time. She arrived 40 minutes late without a message. When I asked, gently, what happened, she told me her meeting ran over. Fair enough. But later that night, she brought up, unprompted, that I'd seemed cold when she arrived, that I was already in a mood. I hadn't been in a mood. I'd been reading on my phone, waiting. I said this calmly. She said I was being defensive. I noted it, filed it away. In August, she canceled twice on the same weekend, both times with different explanations that didn't quite match up. I noticed the inconsistency, but didn't raise it. I wasn't interested in building a case against her. I was interested in understanding what was happening. There's a difference. She could be wonderful. That's the thing that complicates any honest account of a relationship that doesn't end well. There were evenings with her that were easy and warm and full of real laughter. There were weekends where we drove out to Selthorpe Lake and stayed at the little lodge near the water, and everything felt uncomplicated and right. I don't want to flatten those moments out of the story. They were real, but the pattern was real too. By September, the mood swings had acquired a kind of structure. Good days followed by bad days, followed by good days again. But the bad days were getting worse, and the triggers were becoming less predictable. A tone of voice I used, a plan I made without checking with her first, even when the plan didn't involve her. A look she thought she'd seen on my face. These became incidents, things that required explanation and apology, and I found myself in the strange position of defending my own expressions and intentions against her version of them. I want to be precise here. She never became violent or made explicit threats. I'm not describing something dramatic. I'm describing something quieter and, in its way, more corrosive, the gradual rewriting of reality. The way a conversation would end and then be reported back to me 3 days later in a form I didn't recognize. The way my attempts to discuss things calmly were consistently framed as evidence of coldness or indifference. The way she could be warm and generous one evening and then, without visible cause, shift into a version of herself that seemed to be looking for something to confirm a grievance. I talked to Leo about it once, briefly. Leo had known me for 11 years. He listened, asked a few good questions, and said what good friends say, only you know what's in a room. I appreciated that he didn't project. He trusted me to read it accurately. By October, I had made my decision. Not impulsively, not in the heat of anything. I've been sitting with it for 3 weeks, turning it over, checking it against my own blind spots. I asked myself the honest questions. Was I contributing to this in ways I wasn't seeing? Was I bringing my own unresolved things into the dynamic? I sat with those questions seriously. The answer I kept arriving at was that I had been patient and consistent and honest, and that the situation was not improving, and that it was unlikely to improve because the problem wasn't external stress or difficult circumstances. The problem was a pattern that predated me and would continue after me. I ended it on a Tuesday evening in mid-October. I called her rather than texting because that's the appropriate way to do something serious. She didn't take it quietly. She moved through several different registers, disbelief, then anger, then a kind of cold clarity that felt almost scripted. She told me I was making a mistake. I told her I didn't think so. She told me I'd regret it. I told her I hoped things went well for her. The call lasted 22 minutes. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a while in the quiet. There was no satisfaction in it. There rarely is when something ends. But there was a steadiness in me that told me I'd done the right thing the right way, and that was enough. I went to bed, slept well, and ran 6 kilometers in the morning. I gave it 2 weeks of silence. I didn't reach out, and she didn't either, beyond a couple of text messages in the first few days that I read and did not reply to, because they were not messages looking for resolution. They were messages designed to provoke a reaction, and I wasn't interested in providing one. The second week of November, I went to a dinner at Priya and Marcus Chen's apartment. Marcus Chen, to be precise, not a name to confuse with anything. 7 or 8 people, the kind of easy gathering where the food is good and the conversation moves around without anyone steering it. I felt light. I've been sleeping better, working well, back to the version of my mornings I preferred. I noticed my phone buzzing on the walk home. A message from my friend Garrett. Have you seen what's going around? I hadn't. I opened the app. Nadia's account. A post, no photo, just text. The kind of text that's designed to look vulnerable while being, functionally, a targeted statement. She didn't name me. She didn't need to. Anyone in our overlapping social circles would know. The language was careful, all implication and suggestion, the specific vocabulary of accusation without accusation. Controlling, emotionally unsafe, I was not allowed to. I had to hide, walking on eggshells. I stood on the corner of Aldwych and Trent and read it twice. My phone buzzed again. Then again. I looked at the notifications. Messages from people I knew and some I barely knew. The tone varied. A few were concerned, a few were angry, 1 or 2 were demanding explanation. Within the hour, 3 or 4 people had shared her post with commentary. I want to describe what I actually felt because it's relevant. Not panic, not rage. I felt something closer to a kind of flat recognition, the way you feel when a thing you'd half anticipated arrives. I had known, somewhere in the back of my thinking, that the end of that relationship carried a risk of something like this. The pattern I'd observed was not a pattern that ends quietly. I also felt, and I'll be honest about this, a brief, clean flash of anger. Not her exactly, at the situation, at the fact that careful behavior and genuine good faith apparently provide no protection against a well-timed narrative. I felt that for about 30 seconds. Then it passed. I walked the rest of the way home. I did not respond to any messages. I poured a glass of water, sat at my kitchen table, and thought. The discipline I'd built over years wasn't about suppressing emotion. It was about not letting emotion drive decision-making. Right now, emotion wanted to respond publicly, wanted to correct the record immediately, wanted to match the energy of the thing being aimed at me. That impulse was understandable and also exactly wrong. I thought about who was sending me messages and why. The people who knew me well were not in that list. Garrett's message was neutral. He was checking in, not accusing. The angry messages were from people at the periphery of my life. People who knew Nadia better than they knew me. People who had no basis for the anger they were directing my way except that a post on a screen had told them to feel it. The people who knew me well were waiting. I thought about what I actually had, because this is where the analytical part of my brain, the part Leo always joked was running parallel to everything else, began doing what it does. What did I have? I had 14 months of text messages, complete, organized by date, automatically on my phone. I had a record of actual interactions that bore no resemblance to the picture being constructed online. I had specific instances, dated, time-stamped, of the actual dynamic. Her volatility, her reframings, her escalations, her inconsistencies. The messages where she accused me of things that hadn't happened. The messages where she changed the account of an argument we'd had. The messages where she acknowledged, in her own words, that she had been unfair or that she'd misread something. Acknowledgments that she now seemed to have entirely forgotten or discarded. The story she was telling was not supported by the record she herself had created. There was no version of public defense that would serve me. That's the thing people don't fully grasp when this kind of thing happens to them. The impulse to explain yourself publicly is a trap. The architecture of social media accusation is designed so that any response reads as guilt management. You explain, you look defensive. You produce evidence, you look vindictive. You stay silent, you look guilty. There is no winning move on that board, which meant I needed to play a different board. I spent an hour and a half that evening going through our text history methodically. Not emotionally. I was past the emotion of it now. In the clean, focused space I enter when a problem requires precision. I wasn't looking for ammunition. I was looking for a coherent, truthful record. The difference matters. Ammunition is selected to wound. A record is comprehensive and accurate, including the parts that reflect poorly on me, the moments where I was hurt or missed something she needed. I was looking for the truth of what had actually happened between us and what that truth showed. What it showed, laid out chronologically, was a pattern that was consistent, clear, and this was the thing that would be most visible to anyone who'd known either of us, deeply at odds with the portrait she'd posted. The controlling behavior she described wasn't there. What was there was me, repeatedly giving her space, absorbing accusations, responding with measured language, declining to escalate. And her, in her own words, flip-flopping on her own accounts of events, pushing, withdrawing apologies she'd made, cycling through grievances. I didn't screenshot everything. I curated carefully, making sure the selection was honest. Not flattering, honest. I included an exchange from August where I had clearly been short with her because omitting it would have been selective in the wrong way. I wanted whoever read this to see the actual record, not a version of me that had never been impatient. Then I drafted a note. Short. I wrote it 4 times before I got it right. The first 3 drafts had too much explanation in them. Explanation signals anxiety. I didn't want anxiety in the text. I wanted steadiness. The final version was 8 sentences long. I'm aware of what's been posted. I'm not going to address it publicly. That's not how I want to handle something this personal. But I do want the people who matter to me to have an accurate picture of what actually happened between Nadia and me. So I'm sharing our text history from the past year. I haven't edited it to favor myself. You'll see moments where I wasn't at my best. What you'll also see is a consistent record that doesn't support what's being claimed. I'm not asking anyone to take sides or to say anything publicly. I won't be monitoring how this is received or defending myself further. Those who know me will see the truth for themselves. I added the compiled screenshots below it, organized chronologically with brief, neutral annotations, not editorial, just identifiers. July 23rd exchange, August 14th cancellation, September 9th argument and follow-up, the kind of thing that made the document navigable without spinning it. I sent it to 11 people. Leo, Garrett, Theo, and Bex. 3 other close friends who were part of the overlapping social circle and would inevitably be hearing the story. My sister, Mara. 2 colleagues who knew both of us slightly and had been among those to send concerned messages that day. That was the whole list. I did not send it to anyone outside that circle. I did not post it. I did not quote respond to Nadia's post. I did not send anything to journalists or mutual acquaintances or anyone who might amplify it. I put my phone down, made dinner, and watched something on television that I don't even remember now. I slept without difficulty. The following 3 days were the most instructive part of the whole thing. I watched from a deliberate distance, checking in no more than twice a day, no more, as the situation evolved without my involvement. The first thing I noticed was who responded to my note and how. Leo replied within minutes. I've known you 11 years. None of this surprised me. Garrett wrote a longer message that I appreciated but won't reproduce here because it was private. Theo called me, which is what Theo does. He's not a texter. He was brief and direct. We didn't need to send this. I knew already, but I'm glad you did. Beck sent a voice message that made me laugh, which I hadn't expected. She said, in her characteristically unfiltered way. I sat next to that woman at my own dinner table and watched her rearrange 3 things you said in the retelling. I clocked it then. This confirms what I already thought. What I did not expect was how quickly the external story began to lose structural integrity on its own. On the second day, someone who apparently knew Nadia from before a relationship, a woman named Petra who moved in adjacent social circles, posted a short comment under Nadia's post that simply said, "I hope you're doing okay. We should talk." The kind of comment that's not quite agreement, not quite support, and lands in a way that makes other readers pay closer attention to what's underneath. I noticed it without placing significance on it until a few hours later when Nadia deleted the comment. That was interesting. On the third day, 2 things happened in sequence. The first, one of the people I'd sent the document to, not someone I'd have predicted, apparently showed it to a mutual friend of theirs and Nadia's. I hadn't authorized circulation beyond my original list, but I also hadn't explicitly forbidden it, and I wasn't going to spend energy being upset about it. The document was factually accurate and honest. I had nothing to fear from it being read by more people. The second thing, one of Nadia's supporting comments on the post, from a friend of hers named Ross, who had been among the more aggressively angry messages on night 1, quietly deleted his comment. No explanation. It was just gone. I didn't know what Ross had seen or heard. I didn't need to. The pattern was becoming visible on its own. This is the thing about a consistent record versus a constructed narrative. The record holds. The narrative has to be maintained, and it is exhausting to maintain, and inconsistencies surface because human beings are not careful enough liars to keep a detailed false account coherent over time. They contradict themselves in smaller venues. They leave trails. The people on the periphery start doing their own quiet math. I didn't do anything on day 4 except run, work, and go to a colleague's birthday drinks at a bar called Ferncroft in the Casal district. Small gathering, maybe 12 people. I was fine. More than fine. There's a quality of evenness that comes from having handled something the right way. Not a swaggering confidence, not triumph. Just an internal quiet that you can trust. On day 5, Nadia updated the post. She didn't delete it, but she softened the language in the body text in 3 places. Changed controlling to difficult. Changed I was not allowed to till I felt like I couldn't. The edits were subtle enough that someone reading it fresh might not have noticed, but social media keeps nothing secret, and multiple people noticed and screenshotted the original. The edits generated more suspicion than the original post would have if she'd left it alone. I did nothing. On day 7, the post was gone. A week or so later, I was having lunch with Leo at a ramen place near our office called Tanaka, just the 2 of us, catching up on a new client pitch. We were 40 minutes into a genuinely useful conversation about brand positioning before either of us mentioned any of it. Leo brought it up, not me. "So," he said, setting his chopsticks down, "you came out of that pretty cleanly." "Yeah," I said. "The document was smart. The document was accurate," I said. "There's a difference." He smiled. Leo has the kind of smile that contains the history of a long friendship. Most people would have gone on defense, would have been on the app within an hour trying to correct things. That's exactly what she would have wanted. I thought about how to say the next part correctly. The moment I tried to defend myself publicly, I handed her the narrative. I became the guy who's defensive, who's scrambling, who looks like he has something to hide. The only play was to step off that field entirely. And the document, private record to people who already knew me. I wasn't persuading strangers. Strangers are never going to be the people whose opinion of me actually matters. I picked up my cup of tea. The people who matter were going to see the truth eventually. I just made sure they had access to it quickly. Leo was quiet for a moment. She didn't come across well in those messages. She came across accurately. That's all. I didn't feel satisfaction saying it. I want to be clear about that. There's a version of this conversation where I'm sitting there feeling vindicated and clean and superior. And I want to be honest that it wasn't quite that. I felt something more complicated. Something close to sadness, maybe that it had ended that way, that a person I had genuinely liked had made a choice to rewrite our time together into something it wasn't. That's a sad thing to do. It reflects something in a person that has nothing to do with me, and it will follow them forward. I don't carry anger toward Nadia. I want to be clear about that too. I don't think she's a monster. I think she's someone who experiences the end of things as a kind of crisis, and when she's in crisis, she reaches for the tools available to her. And one of those tools is controlling the narrative, and she reached for it without thinking about whether it was true. People do that. It doesn't make them evil. It makes them human in a particular and unfortunate way. But I also don't feel obligated to absorb the consequences of someone else's crisis management. The world doesn't work that way, or at least it shouldn't. Here's something I've thought about since. The thing that actually protected me had been built long before any of this happened. Not the text document. That was a tactic and a useful one, but it wasn't the foundation. The foundation was 11 years of being a consistent, legible person to the people around me. Leo, Theo, and Bex. Garrett, my sister Mara, the small, solid circle of people who had seen me at my best and my worst over years in circumstances that were sometimes difficult and sometimes trivial, and who had accumulated a picture of who I actually was. That picture didn't match what was being posted about me, and they knew it didn't match immediately without needing to be convinced. That's what I mean when I say the record holds. The record isn't just a folder of screenshots. It's the accumulated experience of everyone who's known you honestly over time. You can't manufacture that in a crisis. You either have it or you don't, and whether you have it is determined by how you've behaved over years, not hours. I had it because I had tried consistently and imperfectly to be honest and fair and reliable in my relationships. Not because I've been planning for this scenario, I hadn't, but because that's how I'd chosen to operate. The people who didn't know me, the strangers who'd read the post and formed opinions, I genuinely didn't concern myself with them. I want to be clear about this because I think it's the part of the strategy that's hardest for most people. The pressure to manage your reputation with people who don't know you is enormous, and it's largely a trap. You will never control what strangers think. You will exhaust yourself trying. And the opinions of strangers are, in any practical sense, not the thing that governs your actual life. Your actual life is governed by the people who know you, the clients who've worked with you, the opportunities that come from trusted relationships. None of those things were at risk. 3 weeks after the post went up and came down, I had coffee with Petra, the woman who'd left that gently destabilizing comment and then had it deleted. She'd reached out through a mutual contact, nothing dramatic, just asking if I'd be open to a conversation. I was curious, so I said yes. We met at Alden, a coffee place with exposed brick walls and good light, and she was direct in a way I respected. She told me she'd known Nadia for 4 years, that they'd been close for 2 of them, and that she'd watched a similar pattern play out once before with someone else. She didn't give details beyond that. She wasn't gossiping. She just wanted me to know, she said, that she believed me. I told her I appreciated it, which I did, and then I said something that I meant. It would have been fine either way. She looked at me for a moment. You believe that? I do, I said, because the alternative to believing it is spending your energy trying to control what other people think, and I'm not interested in that life. We talked for another hour about other things. She was interesting company. I left feeling good, not because the conversation had validated me. I had what I needed before we sat down, but because it had been a genuine exchange between 2 people being honest with each other, which is one of the small pleasures of being a person in the world. December came in cold that year, the real cold, the kind that settles into the Varon streets and doesn't lift. I ran in it anyway. I worked well. Pericept closed the last quarter strongly. 2 new client contracts and a referral from a brand director I'd worked with 3 years earlier that turned into our largest engagement to date. The work was good. It required my full attention, and I gave it. On a Friday evening in early December, Theo and Bex hosted another dinner. 10 people this time, the long wooden table again, Burlo again, the kind of evening that doesn't need a reason. I arrived on time and sat across from someone I'd met once before, a structural engineer named Callum, who had this quality of slow, precise observation that I tend to trust in people. We ended up in a long conversation about how systems fail, engineering systems, organizational systems, personal ones, and what the early indicators usually look like. He had a phrase I've thought about since. He said that most structural failures are not sudden. They are gradual accumulations of small compromises that each seem manageable individually. The dramatic collapse is just the moment when the accumulated weight exceeds capacity. The actual failure happened much earlier in all those reasonable seeming compromises. I thought about that on the walk home. About Nadia, about the 14 months, about the point at which I had first noticed the pattern and the time it had taken me to act on what I noticed. I'd been patient, which was the right call, but I'd also been slower than I needed to be because some part of me had kept hoping the pattern would change, had wanted to give it every possible benefit of the doubt. That's not weakness exactly. It comes from a good instinct, from wanting to be fair, but it can become a compromise in the sense Callum meant. A small one repeated. I filed that away. This is where things stand, and I'll finish here because the rest is just ordinary life, which is genuinely a good thing to have. I don't think about Nadia much. Not because I've suppressed it, but because there's nothing actively unresolved. The situation ran its course. The record held. I continued. What I think about more, and what I think was ultimately the more valuable lesson of the whole year, is the question of what you do when someone tries to take your narrative away from you. The answer, I've concluded, is that you don't fight for the narrative. You keep building the record. The narrative is a story told on someone else's terms, on someone else's platform, in someone else's timing. The record is what actually happened, accumulated over time, held by people who were present. You can't control the narrative. You shouldn't try. What you can do is be so consistent over time that the record speaks for itself, not loudly, not publicly, but clearly to the people who matter in the moments when it counts. I've never addressed what Nadia posted. Not once. Not publicly, not in a subtweet, not in any form of veiled response. No one who knows me expected me to. A few people who didn't know me formed an opinion. I don't know what that opinion was, and I found I genuinely don't need to. On the last morning of November, I ran my 6 kilometers through Kastner Park, came home, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window, watching Varon come to life in the early light, the city shaking off the night in that slow way it has, ordinary and ongoing and indifferent and beautiful. The view from my kitchen isn't the view from the 14th floor. You can't see the skyline, just the street below and the rooftops opposite and the strip of sky between them. But it's mine, and it was enough. It has always been enough. That's the thing about building a life on solid ground. When someone tries to shake it, the ground holds, and you're still standing in the same place you were, doing the same things you were, as the thing that came at you passes over and moves on. I locked the apartment and went to work.
Thanks for listening.